The bounty hunter rode into Fargo, North Dakota on a November morning in 1882, and Zelda Vincent knew trouble had arrived before she even saw his face. The frost clung to everything that morning, transforming the rutted main street into a glittering pathway of ice and mud. And when his black stallion came around the bend near the mercantile, steam rising from its nostrils like dragon's breath, every person on that street stopped what they were doing to stare. Zelda stood on the porch of her father's boarding house, a basket of laundry pressed against her hip, and watched as the rider dismounted with the fluid grace of a man who had spent more time in the saddle than on his own 2 feet. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that fell past his collar and a beard that looked like it had not seen a razor in months. 2 revolvers hung low on his hips, and a rifle jutted from the saddle holster on his horse. Even from a distance, Zelda could see the hardness in his posture, the way he moved like a coiled spring ready to unleash violence at the slightest provocation. He tied his horse to the post outside the saloon and disappeared inside without so much as a glance at the people watching him. "That is Isaiah Cross," said Mrs. Pemberton, who had come up beside Zelda so quietly that she made her jump. The older woman clutched her shawl tighter around her shoulders, her breath misting in the cold air. "I heard the sheriff talking about him last week. He is a bounty hunter from Wyoming. Tracked a man all the way from Cheyenne and killed him in a gunfight in Bismarck 2 months ago." Zelda felt a chill that had nothing to do with the November cold. "What is he doing in Fargo? Looking for someone, I expect. That is what his kind does. They warned me when I was a girl to stay away from men like that. Too rough, too dangerous. Nothing but death follows them wherever they go." Mrs. Pemberton shook her head and hurried away, as if even talking about the stranger might bring bad luck down upon her head. But Zelda could not stop thinking about him for the rest of that day. She went through her chores mechanically, helping her father serve meals to their boarders, scrubbing dishes until her hands were raw, mending linens that had seen better days. The boarding house had been her whole world since her mother died 3 years ago, leaving her and her father to manage the business alone. At 22, Zelda should have been married by now, settled with a family of her own, but the eligible men in Fargo had never interested her much. They were farmers, mostly, good men with calloused hands and simple dreams, and while she respected them, she could not imagine spending the rest of her life listening to talk of crop yields and cattle prices. That evening, after the supper dishes were washed and put away, Zelda wrapped herself in her heavy wool coat and stepped out onto the porch. The temperature had dropped further as the sun set, and the stars overhead were sharp as diamond points in the black sky. Fargo was quiet at this hour, most people already retreating to their homes to escape the bitter cold that swept down from Canada this time of year. She was about to go back inside when she heard footsteps crunching on the frozen ground. A figure emerged from the darkness, moving with that same predatory grace she had noticed that morning, and Zelda realized it was Isaiah Cross. He stopped when he saw her, and for a moment they simply looked at each other across the dim space illuminated by the lantern hanging beside the door. "Evening," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the cold air. "Evening," Zelda replied, proud that her voice came out steady. Up close, she could see that he was younger than she had first thought, probably no more than 26 or 27, though his eyes held the kind of weariness that made him seem much older. "This a boarding house?" he asked, gesturing toward the building. "It is. Vincent's boarding house. My father owns it." Isaiah nodded slowly. "I need a room. How much?" $3 a week, meals included. $5 if you want your laundry done. "I will take it. A week to start." He reached into his coat and pulled out a worn leather wallet, counting out bills that he handed to her. His fingers were scarred, she noticed, the knuckles thick and misshapen as if they had been broken and healed badly. Zelda took the money and tucked it into her pocket. "I will show you to a room. We have two available on the second floor." She led him inside and up the narrow staircase, acutely aware of his presence behind her. The boarding house was old, built 20 years ago when Fargo was just starting to grow from a rough frontier settlement into something resembling a proper town, and the stairs creaked under their combined weight. She showed him to a corner room that overlooked the street, small but clean, with a bed, a washstand, a chair, and a trunk for storing belongings. "Breakfast is at 6, dinner at noon, supper at 6 in the evening," Zelda said, standing in the doorway while Isaiah surveyed the room. "If you need anything, my father and I sleep on the first floor, last door on the left." "This is fine," Isaiah said. He set his saddlebags on the trunk and turned to face her. "Thank you, Miss Vincent." "You are welcome, Mr. Cross." She hesitated, curiosity getting the better of her caution. "Are you staying in Fargo long?" Something flickered across his face, too quick for her to read. "Depends on how long it takes to find what I am looking for." "And what might that be?" "A man named Dutch Keller. You know him?" Zelda shook her head. "I have never heard that name before." "Good. Keep it that way." Isaiah turned back to his saddlebags, clearly dismissing her, and Zelda felt a flash of irritation at his brusque manner. "Supper was 2 hours ago, but I can bring you up a cold plate if you are hungry," she said, more sharply than she intended. He looked at her again, and this time she saw something soften in his expression. "That would be kind of you. I have not eaten since breakfast." Zelda went downstairs and prepared a plate of sliced ham, bread, cheese, and pickles, along with a cup of coffee that was still warm from supper. When she returned to his room, Isaiah was standing by the window, looking out at the street below. He had removed his coat and gun belt, and without them he looked more human, less like the dangerous stranger everyone had warned her about. "Here," she said, setting the plate and cup on the small table beside the bed. "It is not much, but it should hold you until breakfast. It is more than enough." Isaiah came over and looked down at the food, and to Zelda's surprise, she saw genuine gratitude in his face. "Thank you, truly." "You are welcome." She moved toward the door, then paused. "Mr. Cross, if I may ask, what did this Dutch Keller do?" Isaiah's jaw tightened. "He murdered a family outside of Cheyenne. Father, mother, 3 children, shot them in their sleep and robbed them. The youngest was 4 years old." Zelda felt the blood drain from her face. "That is horrible. That is why I am going to find him and bring him to justice." Isaiah's voice was flat, matter of fact, but she could hear the steel beneath it. "How do you know he is in Fargo?" "I do not, for certain. But I tracked him to Bismarck, and I heard he was heading east. Fargo is the biggest town between Bismarck and Moorhead. If he came this way, someone will have seen him." Zelda nodded slowly. "I hope you find him then." "I will." There was no arrogance in the statement, just quiet certainty. She left him to his meal and went downstairs, where her father was reading the newspaper by the fire in the parlor. Thomas Vincent was a good man, patient and kind, but the years since his wife's death had carved deep lines into his face and turned his hair from brown to gray. He looked up as Zelda entered. "We have a new boarder," Zelda said, settling into the chair across from him. "Isaiah Cross. He is a bounty hunter," her father frowned. "I heard about him. People are saying he is dangerous. He seems polite enough to me." "Zelda, a man like that, he is not someone you want to get involved with. His life is violence and death. He could bring trouble down on this house. He paid for a week in advance and asked for nothing more than a meal. That hardly seems like trouble." Thomas set down his newspaper and looked at her with concern. "I know that look in your eyes. You are curious about him, but you need to be careful. Men like Isaiah Cross, they do not settle down. They do not build lives. They just keep moving until someone faster or meaner comes along and puts them in the ground. I am not interested in him, Zelda protested, but even as she said it, she knew it was not entirely true. There was something about Isaiah Cross that fascinated her, something beyond the obvious danger and mystery. She had seen genuine emotion in his face when he talked about the murdered family, a kind of righteous anger that suggested he was more than just a mercenary hunting for bounty money. The next morning, Zelda woke before dawn to start preparing breakfast for the boarders. They had 6 staying with them now, including Isaiah, and feeding them all required an early start. She fried bacon and potatoes, scrambled eggs, baked biscuits, and made a pot of strong coffee. By the time the boarders started filtering into the dining room, the whole house smelled of food and warmth. Isaiah was the last to come down, and Zelda noticed that several of the other men tensed when he entered the room. He seemed oblivious to their reaction, or perhaps just accustomed to it, and took a seat at the far end of the table. Zelda served him a plate piled high with food, and he thanked her with a nod before eating in silence while the other men talked quietly among themselves. After breakfast, Isaiah went out into the town, and Zelda did not see him again until late afternoon. She was in the kitchen, peeling potatoes for supper, when her father came in looking worried. Isaiah Cross got into a fight at the saloon, Thomas said. I heard about it from Henry Morrison. Apparently he was asking questions about that outlaw he is looking for, and some drunk cowboy took offense and threw a punch. They say Cross broke the man's arm and 3 ribs before the sheriff could break it up. Zelda felt her stomach twist with concern. Is Isaiah in jail? No. The sheriff let him go because the cowboy started it, but people are scared, Zelda. They do not want that kind of violence in Fargo. That evening, Isaiah did not come down for supper, and Zelda found herself glancing at the stairs repeatedly, wondering if he was in his room or if he had left town entirely. After the meal was finished and the dishes were washed, she prepared another plate and carried it upstairs. She knocked on his door, and after a moment he opened it. His face was unmarked, but she could see his knuckles were split and bleeding. He looked at the plate in her hands and shook his head. You do not need to keep bringing me food. I can come down for meals. I thought you might prefer privacy tonight after what happened. Isaiah's expression darkened. You heard about that. My father told me. He said the other man started it. He did. I was just asking questions and he decided I was causing trouble. I tried to walk away, but he followed me outside and took a swing. I defended myself. You broke his arm. I know. Isaiah looked down at his damaged hands. I did not mean to hurt him that badly. I just reacted. Zelda held out the plate. Eat something. Then let me look at your hands. He hesitated, then took the plate and stepped back to let her into the room. She closed the door behind her, knowing it was improper but not caring. She watched as he sat on the bed and ate, slower this time than the night before, as if he was thinking about something other than the food. When he finished, Zelda poured water from the pitcher into the wash basin and brought it over to him. She sat beside him on the bed and took one of his hands in hers, gently washing away the dried blood. His hands were larger than hers, rough with calluses, and she could feel the strength in them even as he held perfectly still and let her work. You do not need to do this, Isaiah said quietly. I know, but I want to. Zelda looked up at him and their eyes met. Why do you do this? Hunt men for money. It seems like a lonely, dangerous life. Isaiah was silent for a long moment. It is both of those things, but I am good at it and I do not know how to be anything else. I have been doing this since I was 18. What did you do before that? I grew up on a ranch in Colorado. My parents died when I was 16, influenza, and the bank took the ranch because they had debts I could not pay. I drifted for a while, took odd jobs, got into some trouble. Then I met a bounty hunter named Sam Walker who needed help tracking a gang of rustlers. He taught me the trade, and I have been doing it ever since. You have any family left? A sister. She lives in San Francisco with her husband. We write sometimes, but I have not seen her in 4 years. Isaiah looked down at his hands, which Zelda was still holding. This is no kind of life to share with anyone. That is why I stay alone. Zelda finished cleaning his knuckles and wrapped them with strips of clean cloth. You could do something else, learn a different trade, start over. Maybe, but not until I find Dutch Keller. The hardness was back in his voice. He needs to answer for what he did. And after that, Isaiah looked at her, and she saw something vulnerable in his expression, something that made her heart ache. I do not know. I have never thought that far ahead. Zelda stood and picked up the empty plate. You should. Everyone deserves to think about their future, even bounty hunters. Over the next few days, Isaiah continued his search for Dutch Keller, talking to people all over Fargo, visiting every saloon, gambling house, and hotel. Zelda saw him each morning at breakfast, and each evening at supper, and despite her father's warnings, she found herself looking forward to those brief encounters. Isaiah was always polite, always grateful for the meals, but he kept a careful distance, as if he was afraid of getting too close to anyone. On the 4th day of his stay, Zelda was at the general store buying supplies when she overheard 2 men talking about Isaiah. They were ranch hands, rough-looking fellows who clearly spent more time with cattle than people, and they were talking loud enough that half the store could hear them. I am telling you, that bounty hunter is bad news, one of them said. He has been asking questions all over town, making people nervous. Someone is going to get hurt if he keeps this up. I heard he killed 6 men in a shootout in Laramie last year, the other man replied. 6 men. He is nothing but a murderer with a badge. Zelda felt anger flare in her chest. She set down the bag of flour she had been examining and walked over to the 2 men. Excuse me, but you are wrong about Isaiah Cross. They both turned to stare at her, clearly surprised that a woman would interrupt their conversation. The first man, a burly fellow with a thick mustache, sneered at her. You know him, do you? He is staying at my father's boarding house. And yes, he is a bounty hunter, but he is not a murderer. He is hunting a man who killed an entire family, including 3 children. Maybe instead of gossiping about him, you should be grateful that someone is trying to bring justice to this world. The second man, younger and leaner, had the decency to look embarrassed. But the first man just laughed. You defending him, sweetheart. You sweet on the big, bad bounty hunter. I am defending the truth, Zelda said coldly. And I am not your sweetheart. She turned on her heel and marched out of the store, leaving her shopping unfinished. She was halfway back to the boarding house before her anger started to fade, replaced by confusion about why she had reacted so strongly. She barely knew Isaiah Cross. He had been in Fargo less than a week, and their interactions had been brief and superficial. Yet she found herself thinking about him constantly, wondering what he was doing, worrying about whether he was safe. That evening, a blizzard rolled in from the north, bringing with it winds that howled like wolves and snow that fell so thick it was impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. The temperature plummeted, and Thomas Vincent spent the evening making sure every window was sealed tight and every fireplace was burning hot. The boarders huddled in the parlor after supper, reluctant to retreat to their cold rooms upstairs. Isaiah was the exception. He excused himself right after eating and went upstairs, and after an hour, Zelda began to worry that he might be freezing in that corner room. She knew from experience that the rooms on the 2nd floor could get brutally cold during blizzards, and she had seen that Isaiah's coat, while sturdy, was worn thin in places. She gathered up several extra blankets from the linen closet and carried them upstairs. When she knocked on Isaiah's door, it took him a long moment to answer, and when he did, she saw that he was shivering despite being fully dressed, his coat included. "I brought you extra blankets," Zelda said. "This storm is going to last all night and that room gets cold." "You did not have to do that." Isaiah's teeth were chattering slightly, and he stepped back to let her in. Zelda set the blankets on the bed and looked around the room. The single window rattled in its frame, letting in drafts of frigid air, and the small fireplace in the corner held only a few dying embers. "Why did you let the fire go out?" "I did not want to use up all your firewood." "Isaiah, we have plenty of firewood." "You will freeze to death if you try to sleep in here without a fire." Zelda knelt by the fireplace and began rebuilding it, adding kindling and logs from the stack beside the hearth. Within minutes, she had a cheerful blaze going, and warmth began to spread through the room. Isaiah watched her work, and when she stood up and brushed off her hands, he said quietly, "Thank you. You have been very kind to me since I arrived. I am not used to that. People are not kind to you, not often. Most people are afraid of me or they want something from me. You are different." Zelda studied his face in the firelight. "I am not afraid of you, maybe you should be. Everyone keeps warning you about me, do they not? Telling you I am too rough, too dangerous." "They do," Zelda admitted, "but I do not believe them. I think you are just a man trying to do the right thing in a hard world. That does not make you dangerous. That makes you brave." Isaiah stepped closer to her, and Zelda could see the surprise in his eyes, as if no one had ever called him brave before. "You do not know what I have done. The things I have had to do to survive." "Then tell me," he shook his head. "I do not want you to look at me differently. I will not." Isaiah was silent for a long moment, the firelight casting shadows across his face. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and rough. "I have killed 9 men, Zelda. Some of them deserved it, some of them I am not so sure about. I have tracked people across half the country and dragged them back to face hanging or prison. I have done things that would make you sick if I described them in detail. That is who I am. That is what I do." Zelda reached out and took his hand, the one she had bandaged a few days ago. "I do not care about your past. I care about the man standing in front of me right now. And that man, he is trying to find justice for a murdered family. He thanked me for a simple plate of food. He tried to walk away from a fight even though he could have won it easily. That tells me more about who you are than any list of things you have done." Isaiah looked down at their joined hands, and Zelda saw his throat work as he swallowed hard. "Why are you being so kind to me?" "Because I think you need kindness more than you need anything else right now." He raised his eyes to hers, and Zelda felt something shift in the air between them, a recognition, a connection. Before she could think better of it, she stepped closer and wrapped her arms around him in a hug. Isaiah stiffened in surprise. Then slowly, carefully, his arms came around her in return. They stood like that for a long moment, holding each other while the blizzard raged outside and the fire crackled in the hearth. When Zelda finally pulled back, Isaiah was looking at her with such raw emotion that it made her chest tight. "I should go," she said softly. "Let you get some rest." "Stay," Isaiah said, then immediately shook his head. "I am sorry. I should not have asked that. It is not proper." "No, it is not," Zelda agreed, but she made no move toward the door. "Isaiah, what are you really looking for? When you find Dutch Keller and bring him to justice, what then? Will you just move on to the next bounty and the next until someone kills you?" "I told you, I have not thought that far ahead." "Then maybe you should start." Zelda left him standing by the fire and went back downstairs, her heart pounding. She knew she was developing feelings for Isaiah Cross, feelings that went beyond simple attraction or curiosity. She was falling for him, this dangerous, lonely man who had wandered into her life like a ghost from another world. And she had no idea what to do about it. The blizzard lasted 3 days, trapping everyone in Fargo inside their homes and businesses. Zelda and her father kept the borders fed and warm, and Isaiah helped where he could, carrying firewood, shoveling snow away from the doors, fixing a broken shutter on one of the upstairs windows. He had strong, capable hands, and he worked with a quiet efficiency that Zelda found herself admiring. On the second night of the storm, after everyone else had gone to bed, Zelda found Isaiah in the kitchen, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee. She had come down for a glass of water and was surprised to find him there, staring into the steam rising from his cup as if it held answers to questions he had not yet asked. "Could not sleep?" Zelda asked, filling her glass from the pitcher on the counter. "Never sleep much," Isaiah said. "Habit from years on the trail, you learn to wake up at the slightest sound." Zelda sat down across from him. "That sounds exhausting." "It is." Isaiah took a sip of his coffee, then set the cup down carefully. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why are you not married?" "You are beautiful, smart, kind. You must have had plenty of men interested in you." Zelda felt heat rise to her cheeks at the compliment. "There have been a few who have shown interest, but I never felt anything for them. My father keeps telling me I am too particular, that I should settle down before I get too old. But I do not want to marry someone just for the sake of being married. I want to feel something real. And you have never felt that." "Not until recently." Zelda met his eyes, her heart hammering. "Not until you." Isaiah drew in a sharp breath. "Zelda, I cannot offer you anything. I do not have a home. I do not have stability. My life is dangerous and uncertain. I know, but that does not change how I feel. You barely know me. I know enough." Zelda reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. "I know that you are gentle when you think no one is looking. I know that you care about justice, about right and wrong. I know that you have been hurt and that you are scared of letting anyone get close to you. But I am not scared of you, Isaiah. I am only scared of watching you walk away when this is over." Isaiah turned his hand over and laced his fingers through hers. "You deserve better than a bounty hunter who does not know if he will live to see next year. Maybe, but you are what I want." They sat like that for a long time, holding hands across the table while the wind howled outside and the house creaked and settled around them. Finally, Isaiah stood and pulled Zelda to her feet, drawing her into his arms. This time when they embraced, it felt different, more intentional. And when Isaiah tilted her chin up and kissed her, Zelda felt like the world had finally clicked into place. His lips were warm and gentle, and the kiss held a tenderness that contradicted everything people had said about him being too rough, too dangerous. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard, and Zelda could see the conflict warring in Isaiah's eyes. "This is a mistake," he said hoarsely. "I am going to hurt you, then hurt me. I would rather have something real, even if it ends badly, than spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been." Isaiah rested his forehead against hers. "You are impossible." "I know." He kissed her again, deeper this time, and Zelda felt herself melting into him. They stayed in the kitchen until the fire burned down to embers, talking in whispers about their lives, their hopes, their fears. Isaiah told her about growing up on the ranch in Colorado, about how much he had loved working with horses, about the dreams he had harbored before his parents died, and everything fell apart. Zelda told him about her mother, about how much she missed her, about the loneliness that had haunted her since her death. As dawn began to break, painting the snow-covered world outside in shades of pink and gold, Isaiah walked Zelda to her bedroom door. "I should not have kissed you," he said. "I should not have let this happen, but you did, and I am glad. Zelda, when I find Dutch Keller, I have to take him back to Cheyenne to stand trial. I cannot stay in Fargo. Then I will come with you. Isaiah shook his head immediately. No, it is too dangerous. Keller is a killer, and if he realizes I am close, he will try to ambush me. I will not put you in that kind of danger. You cannot protect me from everything. I can try. Isaiah cupped her face in his hands. Give me time. Let me finish this job, and then we can figure out what comes next. I promise I will come back to you. People who make promises like that do not always keep them. I will keep it. I swear to you. Zelda wanted to argue, but she could see the determination in his face and knew it would be pointless. Instead, she stood on her toes and kissed him one more time, trying to pour all her feelings into that single gesture. When she pulled back, Isaiah looked shaken. You are going to be the death of me, Zelda Vincent. Good. Then maybe you will stop taking foolish risks. The blizzard finally broke on the fourth day, and by evening the sky was clear and full of stars. Isaiah resumed his search for Dutch Keller, and Zelda went back to her regular duties at the boarding house, but everything felt different now. They were careful not to show affection in front of others, but Zelda could feel the weight of Isaiah's gaze on her whenever they were in the same room. And at night, they would meet in the kitchen and talk until the early hours of the morning. It was during one of these late-night conversations that Isaiah finally got the break he had been searching for. A drifter had arrived in Fargo that afternoon, half frozen from traveling through the snow, and after Isaiah bought him a hot meal and several whiskeys, the man mentioned seeing someone matching Dutch Keller's description in a small settlement about 30 miles east, near the border with Minnesota. He was using a different name, calling himself Dale Kimball, the drifter said, his words slightly slurred from the alcohol. But he fit the description you gave me, scar on his left cheek, missing the tip of his right ear. He was working as a clerk in a trading post of all things. Isaiah thanked the man and immediately began preparing to leave. Zelda found him in his room that night, packing his saddlebags and checking his weapons. You are leaving, she said, trying to keep the hurt out of her voice. I have to. This is the first real lead I've had in weeks. I cannot let it go cold. When will you be back? I do not know. A week, maybe 2, depending on whether the information is good. Isaiah finished checking his revolver and slid it back into its holster, then turned to face her. I meant what I said, Zelda. I will come back to you. And if something happens to you out there, if Keller kills you, he will not. You cannot promise that. Isaiah crossed the room and pulled her into his arms. I am good at what I do. I have been tracking men like Keller for 8 years and I am still alive. That should tell you something. It tells me you have been lucky. Luck runs out. Then I will be careful. Isaiah kissed the top of her head. I need you to trust me. Zelda closed her eyes and breathed in his scent, trying to memorize it. I do trust you, but I am still terrified. So am I. I have never had anything to lose before. It is making me think twice about every decision. They spent that night together, not sleeping, just holding each other and talking about the future they both desperately wanted but were afraid to believe in. When dawn came, Isaiah kissed Zelda goodbye and rode out of Fargo on his black stallion, heading east toward the Minnesota border. Zelda stood on the porch and watched until he disappeared from view, then went inside and tried to go about her day as if her heart had not just ridden away with him. The next 2 weeks were the longest of Zelda's life. She went through her chores mechanically, cooking, cleaning, managing the boarding house, but her mind was always elsewhere, imagining every terrible thing that could be happening to Isaiah. Her father noticed her distraction and tried to comfort her, but there was little he could say that would ease her worry. On the 14th day after Isaiah left, Zelda woke to find fresh snow falling and the temperature dropping again. She dressed quickly and went downstairs to start breakfast, her movements automatic after years of the same routine. She was in the kitchen, frying bacon, when she heard the front door open and heavy footsteps in the hallway. Her heart leaped and she abandoned the stove, rushing into the hallway to find Isaiah standing there, covered in snow and looking exhausted but whole. Behind him, bound in rope and looking furious, was a man who could only be Dutch Keller. Isaiah. Zelda threw herself at him, not caring that he was wet and cold, not caring that Keller was watching with a smirk on his scarred face. Isaiah wrapped one arm around her, keeping his other hand on the rope that bound Keller. "I told you I would come back. You did." Zelda pulled back enough to look up at him, searching his face for injuries. "Are you hurt?" "A few bruises, nothing serious." Keller put up a fight, but not much of one. The sheriff arrived within the hour, alerted by one of the other boarders who had seen Isaiah bring in his prisoner. After Keller was safely locked in a cell, the sheriff took Isaiah's statement and arranged for a marshal to transport Keller back to Cheyenne for trial. Isaiah collected the bounty, $500, and then returned to the boarding house, where Zelda had a hot bath waiting for him and a meal that would have fed 3 men. That night, after everyone else had gone to bed, Isaiah found Zelda in the kitchen again. "We need to talk," he said, and Zelda felt her stomach drop. "About what?" "About us. About what happens next." Zelda sat down at the table, suddenly afraid. "Are you leaving?" "That depends on you." Isaiah sat across from her and took her hands in his. "I have been thinking about what you said about how I could do something else, learn a different trade. And I realized you are right. I do not want to spend the rest of my life hunting men and wondering if each job will be my last. I want something more. I want a real life, a home, a family." "What are you saying?" "I am saying that if you will have me, I want to stay in Fargo. I have money saved from bounties over the years, enough to buy a piece of land and start a ranch. I know horses. I know how to work with my hands. I could build something here, something good. But only if you are willing to take a chance on me." Zelda felt tears prick her eyes. "Of course I will take a chance on you. I already have." Isaiah pulled a small ring from his pocket, a simple gold band with a single small diamond. "This was my mother's. It is the only thing I have left from my family. I want you to have it. Zelda Vincent, will you marry me?" "Yes." The word came out as barely more than a whisper, but Isaiah heard it. He slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. They were married 3 weeks later, in a small ceremony at the church with Zelda's father and a few close friends in attendance. Isaiah wore his only suit, brushed clean and pressed, and Zelda wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved in the trunk in her bedroom. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Isaiah kissed her with such tenderness that several of the ladies in attendance dabbed at their eyes with handkerchiefs. They spent their wedding night in Isaiah's room at the boarding house, and it was the first time Zelda understood what it meant to be truly intimate with another person, not just physically, but emotionally. Isaiah was gentle and patient, and when they finally fell asleep in each other's arms, Zelda felt a sense of peace she had never known before. In the spring, Isaiah purchased 100 acres of land 10 miles outside of Fargo, along the Red River. The property had a small cabin that needed repairs, a barn that needed rebuilding, and good grazing land for horses. Isaiah threw himself into the work with an energy that surprised Zelda, rising before dawn every day to mend fences, clear brush, and repair the cabin roof. Zelda helped where she could, and her father contributed money from the boarding house to help them buy their first horses. By summer, they had 6 horses and were starting to build a reputation for quality stock. Isaiah had a natural talent for training horses, a patience and gentleness that seemed at odds with his rough exterior, and word spread quickly. Ranchers from across the territory came to buy from Isaiah Cross, the former bounty hunter who had traded violence for a peaceful life on the land. In the fall, Zelda discovered she was pregnant. She told Isaiah one evening as they sat on the porch of their cabin, watching the sun set over their land, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Isaiah was speechless for a moment, then he pulled her into his arms and held her so tightly she could barely breathe. "Are you happy?" Zelda asked. "Happy does not even begin to cover it. Terrified, too. What if I am not a good father? You will be wonderful. You are gentle and patient, and you care deeply about doing the right thing. Those are the most important qualities a father can have." Their son was born in May of 1884, during a warm spring rainstorm that washed the world clean. They named him Thomas, after Zelda's father, and from the moment Isaiah held the tiny, squirming bundle in his arms, Zelda knew that the rough, dangerous man everyone had warned her about had completely disappeared. In his place was a father who cried when his son first smiled, who stayed up all night when the baby was sick, who sang lullabies in a rough, off-key voice that somehow always soothed the child to sleep. Zelda's father sold the boarding house and moved in with them when Thomas was a year old. He was getting older, and the work of running the boarding house had become too much for him, but he was still spry enough to help with the horses and to dote on his grandson. The three of them, four counting baby Thomas, built a life together that was simple but rich with love and contentment. Isaiah occasionally got letters from other bounty hunters, men he had worked with in the past, asking if he wanted to take on jobs. He always declined politely, and after a while, the letters stopped coming. He never spoke about his old life, and the only reminders of it were the scars on his knuckles and the occasionally haunted look that would cross his face when he thought no one was watching. One evening in the summer of 1885, when Thomas was learning to walk and Zelda was pregnant with their second child, Isaiah and Zelda sat on the porch after putting their son to bed. The evening was warm, the air filled with the sound of crickets and the distant lowing of cattle from a neighboring ranch. "You ever miss it?" Zelda asked, leaning her head on Isaiah's shoulder. "The excitement, the adventure." Isaiah was quiet for a moment, considering. "Sometimes I miss the simplicity of it. When you are tracking someone, everything is clear. There is a goal, a purpose. But then I remember the loneliness, the fear, the violence, and I realize that I do not miss it at all. This life, with you and Thomas and the baby on the way, this is everything I never knew I wanted. I am glad you stayed. So am I. You saved me, Zelda. I was heading down a dark path and you pulled me back. Every day I wake up grateful that I rode into Fargo and found you." "Everyone said you were too rough for me." Isaiah chuckled. "I was rough, but you found something in me that I did not even know was there. You found the gentle parts I had buried under all the anger and pain. They were always there. You just needed someone to believe in you." Their daughter, Emily, was born in December of 1885. A tiny, red-faced bundle with her mother's dark hair and her father's gray eyes. Isaiah was even more protective of her than he had been of Thomas, hovering anxiously whenever Zelda nursed her, checking on her constantly through the night. Zelda teased him about it, but secretly she found his devotion endearing. As the years passed, the ranch prospered. Isaiah's reputation as a horse trainer grew, and they were able to expand their operation, buying more land and building a proper house to replace the cramped cabin. They hired 2 ranch hands to help with the work, young men from town who were eager to learn the trade. Zelda's father lived to see his grandchildren grow into lively, curious children, and when he passed peacefully in his sleep in 1889, both Isaiah and Zelda mourned him deeply. By 1890, they had 4 children: Thomas, Emily, and twin boys named Jacob and Daniel. The house was always full of noise and laughter, and Isaiah had transformed completely from the dangerous bounty hunter into a devoted father who spent his evenings reading stories to his children and teaching them to ride almost as soon as they could walk. One spring afternoon in 1891, a stranger rode up to the ranch. Isaiah was in the corral, working with a young stallion when the man arrived, and Zelda came out of the house to greet him. He was older, probably in his 60s, with a marshal's badge pinned to his vest. "I am looking for Isaiah Cross," the marshal said, tipping his hat to Zelda. "I am Marshal Henry Dawson from Cheyenne." Isaiah had seen the visitor and came over, wiping sweat from his brow. "I am Isaiah Cross. What can I do for you, Marshal? I am here to deliver news about Dutch Keller. He was hanged last week for the murders he committed. I thought you would want to know, seeing as how you were the one who brought him in." Isaiah nodded slowly. "Thank you for letting me know. There is something else. Before he died, Keller wrote a letter. He asked that it be delivered to you." The marshal pulled an envelope from his coat and handed it to Isaiah. "I do not know what it says, but he seemed to think it was important." After the marshal left, Isaiah and Zelda sat on the porch while the children played in the yard. Isaiah stared at the envelope for a long moment before finally opening it. The letter inside was short, written in a shaky hand. "Cross," it read. "You were right to hunt me down. I did terrible things and I deserve what is coming to me. But I want you to know that I am grateful it was you who caught me and not someone else. You could have killed me a dozen times during that chase, but you brought me in alive to face justice. That takes a kind of strength and honor I never had. I hope you have found peace in whatever life you are living now. You deserve it more than most. Dutch Keller." Isaiah folded the letter and tucked it back into the envelope. Zelda took his hand and squeezed it. "Are you all right?" "I am." "It is strange, getting a letter like that from a man I hunted for weeks, but in a way it feels like closing a chapter. That part of my life is truly over now. And this part," Zelda gestured at the ranch, at the children playing, at the life they had built together, "this part is forever." Isaiah pulled her close and kissed her temple. "I love you, Zelda Cross. Thank you for seeing past the rough exterior to the man underneath. I love you too, and I would make the same choice 1,000 times over." The years continued to pass in a steady rhythm of seasons and celebrations. Thomas grew into a tall, serious young man who inherited his father's skill with horses. Emily was bright and curious, always asking questions and reading everything she could get her hands on. The twins, Jacob and Daniel, were inseparable troublemakers who kept Isaiah and Zelda constantly on their toes. In 1895, Zelda gave birth to their fifth and final child, a daughter named Sarah. She was a calm, sweet baby who rarely cried, and Isaiah doted on her even more than he had on the others, if that was possible. By then, Isaiah was 40 years old, and his hair was starting to show threads of gray at the temples, but he was still strong and capable, and he worked the ranch with the same dedication he had brought to every endeavor in his life. One evening in the summer of 1900, Isaiah and Zelda celebrated their 18th wedding anniversary by taking a ride together across their land, something they tried to do whenever they could steal a few hours away from the children and the ranch work. They rode to a high bluff overlooking the Red River, where they could see for miles in every direction, and watched as the sun set in a blaze of color. "You remember the night I brought you extra blankets during the blizzard?" Zelda asked, leaning back against Isaiah as they sat together on a fallen log. "I remember. I thought you were the most beautiful, stubborn woman I had ever met. I knew I was in trouble. Everyone told me you were too rough, that you would only bring me pain, but they were wrong. You have the gentlest heart of any man I have ever known. Isaiah turned her in his arms so he could look into her eyes. I am only gentle because you taught me how to be. Before you, I was just surviving. You taught me how to live. We taught each other. They sat together as the stars came out, one by one, filling the vast Dakota sky with light. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, and the river murmured its eternal song. The life they had built together had not always been easy, but it had been good, filled with love and laughter, and the kind of deep contentment that comes from knowing you are exactly where you are supposed to be. Their children grew up strong and capable. Thomas took over more and more of the ranch operations as Isaiah got older, and eventually brought home a wife of his own, a rancher's daughter from Montana named Margaret. Emily married a teacher from Fargo and moved into town, where she opened a school for girls. Jacob and Daniel both decided to head west, seeking adventure in the territories, though they promised to write often and visit when they could. Sarah, the youngest, was still at home, helping her mother with the household and learning to train horses from her father. In 1910, when Isaiah was 55 and Zelda was 50, they celebrated the birth of their first grandchild, Thomas and Margaret's son. They named him Isaiah after his grandfather, and when Isaiah held the tiny baby in his arms, Zelda saw tears stream down his weathered face. "What is wrong?" she asked, coming to sit beside him. "Nothing is wrong. Everything is right. I just never imagined I would have this. A family, grandchildren, a legacy. When I was younger, I thought I would die alone in some dusty town, forgotten by everyone. Instead, I have this miracle of a life, and it is all because you took a chance on me." "No," Zelda said, taking his hand. "It is because you took a chance on yourself. You chose to change, to build something better. I just gave you a reason to do it." As the years went by, Isaiah and Zelda gradually handed over more of the ranch operations to Thomas and Margaret, though Isaiah still worked with the horses every day. He was never quite as fast or as strong as he had been in his youth, but the horses still responded to his gentle touch and patient voice. People came from all over the territory to buy cross-ranch horses, and the family's reputation for quality and integrity was unmatched. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1913, Isaiah surprised Zelda with a trip to San Francisco to visit his sister, whom he had not seen in over 30 years. It was Zelda's first time seeing the ocean, and she stood on the beach for hours, marveling at the endless expanse of water. Isaiah's sister, Ruth, welcomed them with open arms and tears of joy, and the two siblings spent days catching up on lost time. "I am so proud of you," Ruth told Isaiah on their last night in the city. "When Mama and Papa died and you left Colorado, I was so worried about you. I heard stories about what you were doing, and I feared I would never see you again. But you found your way to something good. You found love and built a family. That takes more courage than anything else you have ever done." "I had help," Isaiah said, smiling at Zelda. "I had someone who believed I could be more than what I was." They returned to North Dakota renewed and happy, and threw themselves back into the rhythms of ranch life. More grandchildren came. Thomas and Margaret had 3 more children, and Emily and her husband had 2. Jacob wrote from Arizona that he had married a woman named Rosa and was starting a ranch of his own. Daniel sent a letter from Oregon saying he had found work as a lumber mill foreman and was courting a woman named Alice. Sarah, at 28, announced she was engaged to one of the ranch hands who had worked for the family for 5 years, a good man named Patrick, who reminded Isaiah a little bit of himself when he was younger. In the spring of 1915, the entire family gathered for Sarah's wedding. It was a beautiful ceremony held at the ranch, with flowers everywhere and a celebration that lasted long into the night. Isaiah danced with Zelda under the stars, their movements slower than they had been in their youth but no less heartfelt. "We did good," Isaiah said as they swayed to the music. "We raised good children, built a good life." "We did," Zelda agreed, "and I would not change a single thing about it." As they grew older, Isaiah and Zelda spent more and more time simply being together, taking walks around the property, sitting on the porch in the evenings, watching their grandchildren play. Isaiah's hair had turned completely gray, and his hands were gnarled with arthritis, but his eyes were still the same intense gray that had captured Zelda's attention all those years ago. One autumn evening in 1920, when they were both in their 60s, Isaiah and Zelda sat on the porch watching the sunset. The air was crisp and cool, and the leaves on the cottonwood trees had turned brilliant shades of gold and red. Thomas and his family were running the ranch now, and Isaiah and Zelda had moved into a smaller house on the property where they could live in peace and comfort. "You remember the day I rode into Fargo?" Isaiah asked, taking Zelda's hand in his. "Of course. It was November 1882. You looked dangerous and lonely, and I was curious about you from the moment I saw you. Everyone warned you about me. They did. They said you were too rough, too dangerous, that you would only bring me pain." Zelda smiled and squeezed his hand. "They were wrong about everything except one thing." "What was that?" "You did bring me pain. The pain of worrying about you, the pain of childbirth, the pain of watching our children grow up and leave home. But you also brought me more joy than I ever imagined possible. You gave me a life full of love and adventure and meaning. You are my home, Isaiah Cross. You always have been." Isaiah raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "And you are mine. You found the gentle heart I did not know I had. You made me into the man I always wanted to be but never thought I could become. I love you, Zelda. I have loved you from the moment you brought me that plate of food in my room and looked at me like I was worth something." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching as the sun dipped below the horizon and the stars began to emerge. The ranch was quiet except for the distant sound of horses in the pasture and the soft murmur of voices from Thomas's house down the hill. Isaiah and Zelda lived for many more years, growing old together in the house they had built, surrounded by children and grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren. Isaiah passed away peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1928, at the age of 73, with Zelda holding his hand. She mourned him deeply, but found comfort in the legacy they had created together, in the family that bore their name and carried forward their values. Zelda lived another 5 years, spending her days with her children and grandchildren, telling them stories about the rough cowboy who had ridden into Fargo one November day and changed her life forever. She told them about how everyone had warned her he was too dangerous, too rough, but how she had looked past all that and found the gentlest heart in the West. She told them about the life they had built together, about the ranch they had carved out of the Dakota prairie, about the love that had sustained them through every joy and sorrow. When Zelda passed away in the spring of 1933, at the age of 73, she was buried next to Isaiah on a hill overlooking the ranch. Their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren gathered to say goodbye, and as they stood together in the Dakota sunshine, they knew that the love story that had begun 46 years ago in a Fargo boarding house would live on in the family Isaiah and Zelda had created, a testament to the power of believing in someone, of looking past the rough exterior to find the gentle heart beneath. The Cross Ranch continued to thrive for generations, passed down through the family, and every child who grew up there learned the story of their great-great-grandparents, The bounty hunter and the boarding house keeper who had found each other against all odds and built a legacy of love that would endure long after they were gone. And every time the story was told, it ended the same way, with the reminder that sometimes the roughest exteriors hide the gentlest hearts, and that love, when it is true and deep and real, can transform even the most broken soul into something beautiful.